Yeah, delighted to be with you guys today. Um, so I wanted to continue what I started last Tuesday, and then also on Saturdays on this wisdom topic, this deeper topic on the wisdom known as the wisdom of emptiness. But I'll explain what that means. What exactly is empty? Because of course there can be different aspects of that. But when we think about um, when we think about it at the root, what are we each trying to do in our lives? We're just trying to solve our problems and be happy. Like that's the thing that motivates us. Our minds take in a lot of information, about this and that, and seeing the world. We sort of wake up and there's the world. But then what actually moves us, what motivates us in every single action, on one level or another, directly or indirectly, we're always trying to solve a problem or find happiness. And that's true for us as humans. It's true for every human, but it's also true for animals. And it's kind of the basis for being able to recognize the similarity that fundamentally we're not different um, from other people. We're not different from animals and so forth. Each of us are just trying to, from a mental point of view, trying to find happiness and freedom from suffering. From a physical point of view, we're trying to survive and so forth. Um, so when we look at that underlying problem, then the teaching on emptiness, the wisdom of emptiness, gives us a very radical, very new, very very powerful way of dealing with that question of how can we be happy? How can we solve our own sufferings, pains, problems, whatever they are? So I'll guide us through a meditation on this. Just go straight in at the beginning. We'll do some breathing meditation as usual. But then I'm going to guide us through a practical meditation on emptiness, so you get some feeling for that, and then we can discuss afterwards. And certainly, if you have questions, we can go through that. Okay, but our first task is just to decompress a little bit, because I'm sure you've had busy days. So we can just find a comfortable position. Um, if you're on your own, if there's no great risk of falling asleep, you can meditate lying down or standing up, or walking or sitting, whatever. But find a comfortable position. We just make sure our body is relaxed, stretch a little bit if that's useful, and just take a deep breath in and out, and that stretches us internally. It begins to give us a chance to reset. And then another breath, and just inviting ourselves to relax. Just sending this signal, this message internally that perfectly fine for us to relax now and forget about our problems. And then another breath, just asking ourselves, what is important now? It's not a trick question. That's a question. That's a question for you to answer. What is important for you now? It's different all the time, different every day. We can continue in this way, becoming aware of our breathing, to allow our mind to settle down and to stop racing around, and to just settle on our body, begin to settle on our breath. Bringing our attention inside of our body, beginning to feel our hands, our feet, our legs, arms, torso, head. And feeling the slight change every time we breathe, some slight difference. We may feel ourselves beginning to relax a bit, decompress a bit, and we can enjoy this increased peace. Just try to feel that sense of relaxation in your body. And focusing on our breathing and our body gives us a way to practice concentration, to practice meditation, to get greater control over our attention. One of the most powerful meditations we can do is the meditation recognizing the emptiness of ourself as a way to solve our problems. This takes some stable concentration. But the simple way to practice this is beginning by just asking ourselves, what is on our mind normally? Is there what's on our mind? What are we thinking about in general in our life? And probably there is a problem attached to that. There's some problem or challenge in our life that's attached to that we're trying to solve. So in this peaceful state of mind, we can gently bring to mind the problem or challenging situation that's preoccupying us, whatever it is. Then we can, once we have some clear mental sense of what is the problem that's preoccupying us, we shift our attention slightly and ask ourselves, how do we see ourselves in the midst of this problem? What does this problem imply about us? What is the version of ourself that is susceptible to this problem? So, for example, if you're worried about what other people think of you, perhaps that implies that you see yourself as vulnerable to the opinions of others, or you see yourself as overwhelmed or better than everyone else, for example. There are many possibilities. Just ask yourself, how do I see myself in the midst of this particular problem? What's the version of myself that arises there? We try to get a rough mental picture of that version of ourselves. But then we ask ourselves, is that version of ourselves really true? Is that actually us? Is that the way we always are? Is that the way everyone sees us? Or is it just a particular view of ourselves, a particular belief? For example, can you see that version of yourself? Is it a physical thing? Is it something specific in your mind? And as we question that version of ourself in this way, we may come to recognize that it is just a belief, just a view, just a particular concept of ourself. And if it's not true, if that self doesn't really exist, what happens to that problem? So we focus on the recognition that that particular version of ourselves doesn't exist. It's just a concept, just an idea. If it really existed, we would actually be that way. You'd be able to see it or find it. Everyone would see us that way. We'd all be that way in all situations. Since that's not the case, we just think, I can just drop that version of myself. And this is called the emptiness of ourself, like reaching out to touch a version of ourself that simply isn't there, and our hand just passes into empty space. We unlearn that view of ourself and just hold that emptiness of the self. if we forget, we can just trace back through this mental exercise, remembering our problem, the version of ourself that we normally hold on to, and then realizing that that self is just a belief, just a view, and meditating on its emptiness, the lack of that self. Again, if we get distracted, we remember the problem we're dealing with, the version of ourself at the core of that problem, develop doubt and a recognition that that self is just a concept, and then drop it and focus on its absence. And then we can think, if that version of myself doesn't exist, what version of myself would I like to exist? What would be an alternative version that would not be subject to that problem, that would be perfectly capable of dealing with this situation? And we focus on this alternative version of ourself created from our imagination. clearly imagine a new version of ourselves, we have to unlearn or forget the person we think we are. The person that we think we are is at the root of every single problem and suffering that we have. By unlearning that self, all of our problems disappear along with it. And then we can conclude by developing a wish or an intention to make the very best use of this brief time here to build this good habit of mind, build this skill, this wisdom, understanding, seeing through our normal version of ourself, understanding how we can recreate and rebuild a more useful self. We can develop the intention that through this we can increase our capacity to help others, to repay all of the kindness we've received throughout our lives. Then we can open our eyes and arise from our meditation. So it's reasonable if this meditation generates questions and uncertainty in your mind. It's a bit subtle, so this is a good opportunity if you want to raise questions or insights. By all means, it's a good opportunity to do so.
It's really interesting. It's different than some of the other meditations that I've done with you so far. Um, I don't. I think I've got two quick questions. One, I feel like lately when I'm meditating, um, I'm not connecting with my breath as much. It's almost like there's no resistance or not as much strife. And so I'm not getting that same sensation of going as deep. And then the second one is the contrast of this being just such they're very reflective questions. Um, I don't know what else to say.
Sorry, the contrast of this meditation being very
Yeah,
reflective compared to, for example, meditation on the breath.
yeah. So it's one of your meditations that's felt very different for me, but much more cerebral. But I've also been, but I'm also wondering if that was the correct way to feel it, or if the reason lately I've been struggling to connect with breathing the way I had in the past. Maybe because I'm getting really good at it. I don't know. And so I literally had thoughts while I was doing this. There was a little struggle. It was challenging, but a thought that came back was I was enjoying it. But hey, I'm definitely going back and redoing this one on my own. As soon as you post it. But I guess I'm just asking, am I feeling wrong? Like help me with some, maybe a little direction.
Great. So the direction is that meditation is a very general activity, and the purpose of meditation is to increase our mental peace, to engage in an action that increases our mental peace. And so there's many different approaches. So breathing meditation, a very common one. This meditation on emptiness, different approach. There's also meditations on loving kindness, compassion, etc. Lots of meditations. In all cases, our goal is to build our peace of mind. So that's the commonality. And because our mind can't really focus well on more than one thing at a time, when we're meditating on our breath, we focus just on the breath. When we're meditating on emptiness, we try to focus just on emptiness. But emptiness is a subtle object. It's slippery. It's subtle. It's not always easy to get it. Sometimes you get a little feeling that slips away. And that's why, because meditation on the breath is a lot more obvious, not that it's always easy to do, but it's more clear what it is. It's important that we, as a way to build up that familiarity and that practice. The meditation on emptiness can be a bit, so sometimes if we're really stressed and then we do meditation, then it can have a massive impact, big contrast. If we're not so stressed or we're more peaceful, we do meditation, there's less of a marked contrast. So that may be some of what you're feeling.
Yeah, I think so, and I think both. I think the comment you made, something about slippery, that
Mm.
was a really accurate description. And so if I wanted to practice this, say I wanted to go back to the YouTube recording of this, I would keep that in mind. Any other directions? Is this maybe a meditation that requires a little more diligence than, say, breathing?
This is a very subtle meditation. It requires some care and skill, and so it's not so perfectly fine to be patient with it, to try it, or come back to it later and see if it works. And I can spell out a little bit more what, you know, by way of explanation, explain what we're doing further. But yeah.
Okay, and I'm going to go back and try it again. It was certainly insightful, for sure. So thank you.
Yeah, John, just to validate, I feel the same way. I think it would be helpful to repeat it.
Hmm.
Now, having done it once, it's different than meditations I've done in the past. I think for that mental challenge, I felt the same way.
Yeah, perfect.
It is headed in a direction that I very much want to go. I want to be clear on that.
Yeah, fantastic. Yeah, it's great. And so just having heard the words, the explanation, just having practiced it once, what you can think is you're putting seeds in your mind. It's like you're laying down some early tracks that eventually can become very, very well-worn tracks in your minds. But we shouldn't be surprised. It's like going in the wilderness of our mind. We've not gone through these practices before. It's understandable that they would be unfamiliar. And so I'll spell out a little bit more how we come to this, which is that normally we think we know what's going on in our lives, in our world. We sort of walk around and we're walking around telling ourselves a story about this is happening, and that's happening, and she's like this, and he's like that, and this happened, and I used to be like this. And so we've got this very, very elaborate big story, right? And we just kind of assume that story is true. We just kind of assume that that's actually what's happening. That's actually the world that we're living in. But of course, it's just a story, right? And other people in the same house, in the same office, in the same, are living in a very different world. They're living in a very different story, right? You're having the worst day of your life. Somebody else is perfectly fine. You're having the best day of your life. Somebody else is really in a lot of pain. And whenever we're telling the story, the what's important for us to note is that the center of the story is always us, right? Like the world is sort of built around us. But what we need to understand is that this distinction between us and our world, we become different versions of ourselves depending on the story that we're telling about the outer world. Very much like when you go and visit your parents, you're a very different person from when you go and visit your boss and you go and visit your friends and you go and pet your dog. And like, we're very different people in different situations. Why? Part of it, like we say, well, we don't, maybe we don't think about it, but the two are not independent. The way we see other people and the way we see ourselves in that relationship with other people are interdependent. If we change our view of them, we actually change our view of ourselves. If we change our view of ourselves, we change our view of them. Just like if you're talking to someone, you meet somebody who seems to be a stranger, and then all of a sudden you discover that you used to know each other 30 years ago, right? Completely different perception of that person in an instant just because the story has changed. But if we ask ourselves, we go back and ask ourselves, what are we normally thinking about? Like what are we preoccupied with? It's always some problem. We're chewing on something, right? And so if we ask ourselves, okay, what's that problem? What does that problem imply about how we see ourselves? And what if that wasn't really who we were? What if that version of ourselves was just a story? What if it was just an idea? Because in fact, it is just an idea. What if we just could drop that version of ourselves? What happens to that problem? Drop that version of yourself, you drop that problem, see through that. And there's a lot of ways into that, but that's the general movement. What you're doing is you're unlearning your own story. Normally we're building the story, we're learning a new story. Here we're unlearning the story of ourselves. And we need to clear that space if we want to learn a different version of ourselves, and not just in a small way, but in the deepest sense, in the most deep sense, unlearning who we think we are and recreating an utterly new and different version of ourselves. So that's the spirit. Meditation on emptiness is an unlearning process, and the word emptiness is similar to what I described earlier. Like if you reach out to touch something and then there's nothing there, your hand just moves through. Where you think there was something solid, you see there's nothing there. And how to get into that meditation, like the line of reasoning. There's thousands of lines of reasonings, but that's the feeling of it all. So the feeling is that self that I thought I was doesn't exist, and there's no problem, and thus the problems that I thought I was having, those problems don't exist. They disappear in the space of that meditation.
Can I? So thank you. That actually helps, and I did share a lot of that experience. I think that makes it a little more crystal clear with what my challenge was. Through that process, I saw the story. My brain started playing some of the story on a problem of how I see myself, how I've been, how I see other people. And that, as you were going forward, I found it hard to pull myself back out of those little segue of stories. And then once we wrapped, and I connected, felt like I was able to let go. But then when we wrapped up, the whole experience was just a larger experience than I was able to codify once we wrapped up. So thank you.
Yeah, and that's the trick. Whenever we're going, like, if we're going to try to touch on something in our life, it's very easy to get caught up in the bigger story, as exactly like you describe, and all the details of the story. One of my teachers says, just try to boil it down to one word. Like, what is the one word that would describe you in that situation, and strip away all the details, and just get it down to that one word can make it a lot simpler.
I did keep getting the idea of, especially when it was a story connected to other people, was maybe I didn't understand, and maybe I didn't understand that person, or maybe that person didn't understand, and I assumed they did, and that was interesting. That was very interesting, actually.
Great. Yeah, fantastic. So we did a long meditation up front and some brief explanation here. We've got a few minutes, so maybe we just can close with a bit of breathing meditation, and gently reintroduce also this concept of emptiness. So we can again return to breathing meditation for this purpose of stilling the mind, where it makes it easier to touch on these subtle things. So again, focusing on our breathing. And as we relax a bit, just focusing internally, we can notice that even in this activity of meditation or relaxation, we are forgetting that version of ourself that we're normally holding through the day. And so we just focus on, as we are becoming aware of our breathing, relaxing, notice that we're also forgetting, we're also unlearning a version of ourself. The self that always has to be doing, for example. We just relax and focus on our breathing, but with part of our mind, try to notice how, at the same time, we are forgetting about one version of ourself, the version that has to always be doing something. we can conclude with the good intention that recognizes that even in this short period of time, we have begun building some pathways to unlearning unhelpful versions of ourselves, creating more useful versions of ourselves. And that this will eventually open the door for us to become truly free. And we can use this to open the door to others, to help them to become truly free from these limiting conceptions of ourself. And then with this good intention, we can open our eyes and arise from our meditation. So while we're out of meditation, we can just try to keep some mindfulness, some awareness that we are living in a story, right? We're living in the story that we've created from our minds on every level. Everything around us is part of this story that we have constructed instinctively and through our learned ideas about things as well.